It began with silence, the kind that feels heavy like the pause before a confession. Over the Solomon Islands, the dawn air was still. Beneath the dim horizon, clouds swelled like bruises. A single Japanese pilot, Lieutenant Akira Mori, slid his gloved hand along the cold aluminum of his Zero. He whispered a prayer not for victory but for clarity, for the chance to understand what kind of war this had become. He had flown for the Emperor since 1941, 2 years of fire and salt. He had seen American bombers fall like burning stars and watched friends vanish into the sea. No grave, no name, only foam. But that morning, April 18, 1943, something changed. The enemy no longer moved like prey. They hunted with precision, invisible until the moment of death. And for the first time, Akira would meet the machine that turned the tide of the Pacific, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. The name meant nothing to him then. All he knew was that men whispered about it in the ready rooms, a twin-engine monster with the speed of a hawk in the eyes of a god. It climbed where others choked, struck from angles that defied logic. American pilots called it the fork-tailed devil. The Japanese called it something simpler, the Omen. In the months leading up to that day, Akira's unit had begun losing patrols without warning. Flights vanished from radio contact, entire squadrons erased in moments of silence. Reports were strange. The attacks came from the east against the sun where no pilot could see. Survivors spoke of a shadow splitting the sky, guns firing from distances that seemed impossible. They said it came in pairs, moving as one, then breaking apart like a mirror shattering in light. To the Japanese command, these were merely stories. Machines didn't matter, they said, spirit did. The Zero was still the Emperor's sword, graceful and immortal. But to Akira the stories felt like prophecy. He could sense a shift. The Americans were no longer improvising. They were calculating. And somewhere beyond the blue horizon, a new predator was learning how to kill. On the morning of April 18th, Akira's orders were routine. Escort Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's transport from Rabaul to Balhail. It was a ceremonial flight meant to boost morale. The Admiral, the mind behind Pearl Harbor, would inspect forward bases to remind the men why they fought. The escort formation was simple, 2 G-4M Betty bombers carrying the Admiral and his staff, guarded by 6 Zeros. Akira's flight led the rear, high cover. Nothing unusual. Until the sky began to shimmer. At 9:35, the horizon ahead flickered. At first, Akira thought it was sunlight on the sea. Then came the faint, rhythmic pulse of propellers, not the deep hum of Japanese engines, but a sharper, angrier tone like bees in metal cages. He leaned forward, scanning the glare. There, 3, maybe 4 silhouettes low against the sun, flying impossibly fast. Before he could speak, tracer fire erupted from the horizon. The first Betty caught flame instantly, its left wing sheared away. The second banked hard, diving for the jungle below. Akira's radio filled with static and screaming. Then through the chaos he saw them, silver shapes slicing through the light, twin tails flashing in the sun. He pulled hard right, diving to intercept, but the enemy didn't climb or evade. They came straight through, head-on, each movement deliberate, surgical. In seconds, one P-38 cut across his line of fire, its nose cannons blazing. Bullets tore through the canopy beside him. The shockwave cracked the air. Akira rolled, barely avoiding the wreckage of another Zero spiraling down in smoke. In that split second he saw the face of his hunter, a young man, calm, focused, his goggles glinting in the sun. Akira couldn't see his insignia, but the posture told him everything. This was no ordinary pilot. This was someone executing a plan, not a chance encounter. The fight lasted barely 4 minutes. When it was over, both Betty bombers were down. Admiral Yamamoto was dead, his body found later still seated upright, one white glove on his lap, a bullet through his chest. For the first time in the war, Japan's sky was silent, not from victory but disbelief. Akira landed hours later on Bougainville, trembling. His commanding officer met him on the runway. The man said nothing, he didn't need to. They both knew what it meant. The heart of Japan's naval command had been cut out, not by chance but by calculation. The Americans had known the Admiral's route, his timing, even the altitude. It was not luck. It was intelligence. Precision. A new kind of warfare. That night, Akira sat outside the barracks, staring at the jungle. He could still smell the burned oil in his lungs, still see the glint of the twin tails diving through the sunlight. For the first time he questioned what kind of enemy he was fighting. Machines could be built by anyone. But minds that could see across the ocean, read coded messages, plan assassinations in the air, that was something else. He remembered the look of the P-38, sharp, angular, almost unnatural. It didn't bank like a zero. It didn't turn, it pivoted as if guided by thought rather than motion. There was something cold about it, almost inhuman. Yet there was beauty too, a symmetry that spoke of purpose. It wasn't a machine of desperation. It was a machine of belief in engineering, in mathematics, in the future. Akira had grown up believing that courage could overcome steel. His instructors taught that the will of the pilot was stronger than the weight of the aircraft. But after Yamamoto's death, that illusion died. The Americans no longer fought with will, they fought with systems. Each pilot was just one cog in a vast, invisible machine of information and design. Weeks later, Akira would learn the truth, that the Americans had broken Japan's naval code, intercepting Yamamoto's schedule from encrypted radio traffic. That 18 P-38 Lightnings had flown 435 miles from Guadalcanal, using fuel so precise that one miscalculation would mean death at sea. That they had trained for days to strike at the exact minute, and that every shot fired had been measured, not improvised. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. He tried to imagine the men inside those cockpits. Did they feel triumph or only duty? Did they know they had changed the course of the war? Or were they just following coordinates, unaware that their bullets had killed the mind behind Pearl Harbor? Akira didn't hate them. In truth, he envied them. They had purpose, not just faith. His own empire was built on obedience, on the poetry of sacrifice. Theirs was built on precision, on the belief that knowledge was the ultimate weapon. And in that belief they had found something stronger than spirit, control. That night, as the jungle insects droned in the dark, Akira understood something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The war was no longer a contest of men. It was a contest of systems. The sky had become a laboratory and the pilots, its experiments. Machines no longer served men, men served machines. And the P-38 was its first prophet. The weeks after Yamamoto's death passed like a fever. The Japanese command buried the news, whispering it only among officers, yet somehow every man in the Air Corps felt it. Something in the tone of briefings, in the silence of their superiors, gave it away. The empire had lost more than a leader, it had lost its certainty. Akira Mori flew mission after mission over the Solomons, but the sky no longer felt like home. It felt watched. Each sortie began with that same unease. The horizon stretched out like a lie, the sunlight too bright, the clouds too still. They patrolled, but the enemy was never where they were supposed to be. The Americans had learned to vanish. They appeared only when they wished, and when they did, it was with devastating precision. One morning, the squadron was scrambled to intercept a reconnaissance flight near New Georgia. 12 Zeros climbed into the haze, their wings cutting through rising columns of jungle mist. For half an hour, nothing. Then Akira spotted it, a faint silver glimmer far below, gliding just above the tree line. He pushed the throttle, diving in formation. But as they closed the distance, he realized it wasn't one plane. It was 3. And they were waiting. The trap unfolded in seconds. Tracer rounds ripped upward, converging from impossible angles. One of the Japanese fighters exploded in midair, its fuel tank igniting like a sun. Akira rolled to avoid the debris, his stomach lurching as G-force pinned him to the seat. Through the smoke he saw them again, twin tails, white contrails twisting like threads behind them. They didn't chase. They herded. Each movement was coordinated, the P-38s climbing and cutting across the sky in perfect rhythm. Every burst of gunfire was deliberate, not random, not emotional. It was a pattern, a system. Akira tried to match their speed, but his Zero groaned in protest. The Americans had longer legs, higher climb, and something more dangerous than any mechanical advantage: patience. He broke left, the ocean below flashing like shattered glass. Another Zero fell behind him, hid in the fuselage. The pilot's voice screamed through the radio before cutting off. Akira dove, leveling out barely above the waves. His heart hammered, sweat stinging his eyes. The P-38 stayed high, not following the dive. They didn't need to. They had already won. When Akira returned to base, the hangars were half empty. 2 more squadrons had been lost in similar engagements. The mechanics worked in silence, patching bullet holes that seemed to grow each day. A rumor began to spread. The Americans were using radar, something unseen that guided their planes through darkness and cloud. Others said they could hear Japanese transmissions and respond before the orders were even spoken. It sounded like madness, yet in the silence of the barracks, it made sense. One evening while inspecting his aircraft, Akira noticed an unfamiliar figure watching from the edge of the runway, an intelligence officer from Rabaul sent to brief them. The man spoke quietly, his tone clinical, almost detached. He explained that the Americans had developed a network, radio direction, high-frequency listening, signal intercepts. They know our movements, he said. Before you fly, they already know where you'll be. It was the first time Akira understood what it meant to fight an invisible enemy. The Americans were no longer reacting. They were orchestrating. Every engagement, every trap, every death. All pieces of a design built thousands of miles away in rooms filled not with soldiers but with mathematicians. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat by the small airstrip fire, listening to the hum of insects. In the darkness the jungle felt alive, pulsing, whispering. He thought of the P-38 again. It wasn't the machine itself that frightened him, but what it represented. Its very shape seemed to defy tradition. Twin booms, twin engines, twin minds. It was balanced through duplication, control through symmetry. A weapon built not for bravery but for inevitability. He remembered the face of the American pilot he'd glimpsed during the Yamamoto attack. Calm, detached, not driven by rage or fear. Perhaps that was the most terrifying thing of all. A man who could kill without hatred. In the following months, the battle shifted north toward New Guinea. Japanese airfields crumbled under constant attack. The Lightning became a ghostly presence in the sky, too fast to catch, too high to fight. Akira's superiors ordered new tactics. Dive and climb assaults, ambushes from cloud cover. But none of it worked. The Americans adapted faster than doctrine could change. Each mission felt less like combat and more like attrition. Akira watched younger pilots join his squadron, boys barely trained, faces still soft with youth. They bowed, spoke of honor, of the Emperor's divine will, but their eyes betrayed the truth. They were afraid. They had seen what waited for them beyond the clouds. In August, the air over WWII burned. Allied bombers struck the base in waves, escorted by Lightning's flying top cover. The Japanese scrambled to meet them, but the result was massacre. Akira's unit lost half its planes before even reaching altitude. He climbed through the smoke, guns chattering, but the sky was chaos, contrails twisting like veins, flak bursting in white blooms. For a moment he caught a lightning in his sights. He fired, the tracers streaking past the silver fuselage. The P-38 banked hard, looping in an arc so tight it seemed impossible. Then it vanished into cloud. When it reappeared it was behind him. Bullets tore through his left wing. The Zero shuddered, the engine coughing smoke. Akira pulled up, praying the machine would hold. The controls jerked, stiffening. Then silence. The engine died. He was gliding now, weightless, falling through heat and light. He closed his eyes. When he woke he was lying in the wreckage at the edge of the jungle. His plane had sheared off the trees and skidded into mud. Blood covered his hands. Through the ringing in his ears he heard nothing. No gunfire, no engines, only wind. He dragged himself free, collapsing against the trunk of a palm. Above him, the sky pulsed with distant contrails. He stayed hidden for 2 days, half conscious, until a search party found him. Back at base, the medic called it a miracle. But Akira didn't feel saved. Something inside him had changed. The moment his engine went silent, he realized the truth. The Zero, once the pride of Japan, was a relic. Beautiful, yes, but built for a world that no longer existed. The Americans had crossed into something new, a synthesis of man and machine, data and instinct. The Lightning wasn't just faster, it was prophetic. By late 1943, the Japanese air strategy collapsed into desperation. Kamikaze units were being conceived in whispers, talk of sacrifice, of divine wind, of glory through death. To Akira it felt like surrender disguised as faith. The empire had run out of tools and so it turned to souls. In his dreams he still saw the P-38. Not as an enemy but as an idea, cold, immaculate, unstoppable. It haunted him like a mirror reflecting what Japan refused to see, that spirit without understanding is blindness and faith without knowledge is suicide. He began keeping a journal, something forbidden among pilots. He wrote not about victories but about questions. What it meant to fight for a system that no longer listened, what it meant to believe in honor when technology made honor obsolete. One entry read, "They call us warriors but we are ghosts chasing the future. The Americans build the future while we pray to the past." When the night raids came, he watched the horizon burn, orange against black. The Lightning struck first, clearing the airfields, paving the path for bombers. Each attack was more efficient than the last, precise, mathematical. He stopped counting the dead. Numbers no longer meant anything when the outcome was certain. The Empire's radio stations spoke of divine endurance, of turning points to come. But Akira knew better. He had seen the turning point. It had wings of silver and a forked tail. By the end of 1943, the P-38 Lightning was everywhere and nowhere. In every intercepted convoy, every downed bomber, every dying transmission. It had become the sound of inevitability, the hum of a new order rising from the wreckage of the old. And as the year closed, Akira understood that survival itself had become an act of defiance. Not against the enemy but against his own fading faith. By early 1944, the war had shifted beyond the reach of reason. Japan still spoke of honor, of destiny, of the divine wind that would sweep away the invaders. But Akira Mori could see the cracks spreading through every sentence of those broadcasts. Beneath the rhetoric there was fear, a kind of trembling that even the most disciplined voice could not hide. He was transferred to the Marianas, to an airstrip carved into coral and limestone. The ocean surrounded it on all sides, a vast, indifferent mirror. The base smelled of oil and rot. The hangars stood half empty, their floors slick with rainwater and sweat. Planes came in from the front lines every week, battered, blackened, or burning. Few were left. Akira no longer dreamed of victory. He dreamed of silence. The kind that came after an explosion, when the world seemed to hold its breath. He found comfort in those moments, the seconds after chaos before the next wave arrived. When the first P-38s appeared over the Marianas, no one was surprised. They came out of the sunrise, their wings glinting like knives. The air raid sirens wailed, but few scrambled in time. The Lightning didn't dive anymore. It descended with control, a measured descent that felt like judgment. Each strike hit an ammunition dump, a fuel depot, a radio post, not by chance but by design. Akira climbed into his Zero with the others, engines screaming across the strip. He rose through the smoke, banking into the glare. For a moment he caught a Lightning in profile, sunlight flashing across its twin booms. He turned to intercept, but the American pilot pulled up sharply, climbing into the clouds. It was a move no Japanese plane could follow. He broke off the chase, leveling out as tracer rounds sliced through the air ahead. Another Lightning appeared behind him, firing in short, economical bursts. Akira rolled, diving through a column of black smoke. The air burned against his face. He pulled low over the water, engines whining, the surface flashing beneath him like liquid mercury. When he looked up again, the sky was empty. That night he found himself unable to eat. His hands shook. The mechanics were working under dim lamps, their faces hollow. No one spoke. The commanding officer walked past, his eyes fixed on nothing. In his quarters, Akira opened his journal. He wrote, "Each time I fly, the world feels smaller. We no longer fight in the air, we fight in the wires, in the signals, in the minds of men who never see the sky." He had heard whispers of something new. American range control systems, the ability to coordinate entire fleets from a single point. It was as if the enemy could see the war from above, like a god looking down on the movements of insects. Japan still relied on instinct, courage, ritual. The Americans relied on data. And data, Akira realized, was merciless. By summer, the Empire's air strategy had dissolved into fragments. Pilots were being trained in weeks instead of months, their hands barely steady enough to take off. The engineers patched holes with scrap metal and prayer. They called it adaptation. It looked like surrender. In July, Akira was assigned to escort a transport convoy near Saipan. The sea below shimmered like glass, calm and deceptive. Halfway through the route, the radio crackled, coded burst, sharp and anxious. He looked down and saw it, a thin silver line approaching from the horizon. Moments later, the formation shattered. Dozens of Lightnings swept in low, their attack runs impossibly synchronized. It wasn't a dogfight, it was choreography. The Japanese pilots tried to break formation, but the P-38s moved faster than thought. The first wave destroyed the lead ships, the second erased the escorts. Within minutes, the sky was nothing but smoke and fragments of aluminum. Akira's plane took a hit across the fuselage. He pulled hard, climbing into the clouds. When he broke through the top, the world below was on fire, ships burning in the blue, their smoke rising in thin, trembling pillars. He circled once, numb. It was there, above the cloud line, that he felt the weight of something shift inside him. For the first time he no longer felt anger or fear, only understanding. He was witnessing the death of an empire in real time, and it sounded like precision engines. When he landed, the airfield was silent. No one greeted him. He stepped out of the cockpit and stood there, breathing the hot wind, staring at the sea. Behind him, a lieutenant from another unit approached, his uniform torn. "They are gods," the man said quietly. "The Americans. They see everything." Akira said nothing. He looked out over the horizon where the sun sank into the water. "No," he whispered. "They built a god." In the weeks that followed, the base fell into routine collapse. Fuel shortages. Food rationing. Pilots sent out on missions that had no chance of return. Orders came through, increasingly desperate, increasingly absurd. Protect the islands, protect the honor, protect the dream. But the dream was already gone. When the first kamikaze volunteers arrived, Akira watched them with a kind of cold reverence. They were young, unshaken, eyes bright with conviction. They spoke of duty, of sacrifice. They wrote letters to families they would never see again. One of them, a boy named Hayato, sat beside Akira one evening, looking up at the stars. "If I die well," Hayato said, "the gods will remember me." Akira looked at him for a long time. "The gods," he said softly, "have already chosen a side." He meant the machines. When the first wave of kamikazes departed, the pilots saluted from the runway. The air filled with the roar of engines and the smell of oil. Akira watched them vanish into the horizon, tiny black dots swallowed by light. Later that night he wrote in his journal again, "They call it sacrifice. I call it surrender disguised as holiness. We throw lives at machines as if flesh can outfly metal. The Americans do not pray before battle. They calculate. And calculation has no mercy." In the distance, faint flashes illuminated the ocean, the lightning's distant strikes, tracing patterns of destruction across the dark. He imagined the pilots inside, their faces blank, their voices steady. He wondered if they ever looked down and saw the men they killed. Or if, like the P-38 itself, they had learned to stop feeling. He began to sense that the war was no longer a conflict of nations, but of timelines. Japan was fighting from the past. America was fighting from the future. The P-38 Lightning was not just a plane, it was the embodiment of that future. A bridge between man and machine, between instinct and algorithm. By the time autumn came, Akira could barely recognize the world around him. The radio spoke of victories that never happened. The officers recited odes they no longer believed. The sky, once a theater of glory, had become a graveyard. He took to flying solo, long reconnaissance loops over the empty sea. He didn't search for enemies anymore. He searched for meaning, for something left unbroken in the wreckage of ideals. Once, high above the Pacific, he saw a lone lightning gliding beneath him, unaware of his presence. The sun lit its wings until it looked like glass. For a brief moment, he had it perfectly framed in his gun sight. One squeeze and the enemy would fall. But he didn't fire. He only watched. The plane moved gracefully through the air, then tilted and rose, disappearing into the clouds. Akira lowered his hand. Somewhere inside him, something quiet and irreparable gave way. He had realized that the enemy he fought was not a man, not even a nation, it was progress itself. By the start of 1945, the world no longer felt real. The sky that had once carried dreams of empire now carried only smoke. The airstrips were mud, the hangars torn open like ribs. Pilots slept beside their planes because there were no barracks left. Every night the same question hung in the air, heavier than the heat. How much longer could they keep pretending the war still had a shape? Akira Mori had stopped keeping count of missions. The numbers meant nothing now. He flew because it was the only thing left he understood. His Zero, patched and trembling, no longer climbed as it used to. Each takeoff felt like lifting a dying bird. The mechanics worked without words. They knew they were building coffins that could fly. Orders came through from Manila. intercept American bombers heading for Luzon. Akira didn't ask how many. He had learned that numbers were lies the officers told themselves to make duty sound like hope. He climbed into the cockpit before dawn. The sea below was black, endless. Somewhere beyond that horizon was everything Japan still refused to see. When the bombers came, the sky bloomed white. The formation stretched for miles, fortresses of metal escorted by lightnings, their silhouettes sharp against the rising sun. Akira's radio cracked with panic. Commands overlapped, voices dissolved into static. He pushed forward, the engine groaning, his breath shallow. Then he saw them. 4 P-38s dropped from altitude, their wings glinting like mirrors. They moved in perfect unison, one thought shared between them. Akira banked left, diving into their path. The first pass was a blur. Flashes, heat, the air splitting open. He fired a burst that missed entirely, his tracers vanishing into cloud. The second lightning came in low, curving beneath him, its guns silent until the exact second the angle aligned. The sound was not thunder but a steady, mechanical rhythm, a heartbeat made of iron. He felt the impact before he heard it. The tail of his Zero buckled, shrapnel slicing through the canopy. The engine sputtered, coughed, then caught again. He pulled up, half blind, the world spinning in streaks of gray and blue. Through the smoke, he glimpsed another lightning above him, closing, patient, precise. He pulled the stick hard, trying to force a climb, but the Zero shuddered and stalled. The P-38 rolled inverted, diving straight through his line of escape. He could see the pilot's face for a single instant, young, expressionless, eyes hidden behind glass. And then the flash of guns. The bullets ripped through the fuselage, slicing the panel beside his leg. Akira kicked the rudder, desperate. The sky tilted, the ground rushed up, and for a heartbeat everything fell silent. He did not crash. The Zero leveled itself at the last second, engine coughing, smoke trailing. He was alive but the plane was dying. He turned toward the coast, the sea glimmering below. In the distance, the lightning hovered, motionless for a moment before turning away. It did not finish him. It simply left, fading into the light. When Akira landed, the field was already in ruins. Fires burned where the barracks had stood. Men ran in every direction, their shouts drowned by the roar of incoming bombers. He climbed from the cockpit, collapsing onto the dirt. Around him, the empire fell apart not in one final battle, but in 1,000 small silences, broken radios, empty tanks, unread orders. The next day they received word that Tokyo had been bombed again. Entire districts erased. The officers gathered what was left of the squadron and spoke of sacrifice, of honor, of the divine wind. Akira listened, his face blank. There was no wind left. Only smoke. He walked away from the meeting and stood by the shoreline. The horizon shimmered, the color of gunmetal. A single P-38 patrolled high above, too far to reach, too perfect to touch. He watched it trace slow circles across the sky, methodical and endless. In that moment he understood that Japan had already surrendered, not on paper, not yet in words, but in the heart of every man who had seen that plane and realized he could never outfly it. The empire had believed courage could defy gravity. But courage was just another form of gravity, it pulled you down no matter how high you climbed. That night, Akira wrote his final journal entry. The ink bled through the page as he pressed the words too hard. The lightning does not hate. It does not forgive. It simply knows. We fight with prayers and they fight with equations. And in that difference lies our end. The following morning, the base received orders for one last sortie, a suicide mission against an American carrier group approaching from the east. Akira was not chosen. He was told to remain behind to train the next wave of volunteers. Boys barely 17 saluted him, their eyes filled with the same light he had once known, that pure, untested belief that death could be noble. He did not return the salute. One of them, trembling, asked, "Will we meet again in the sky?" Akira looked at him and said quietly, "No. The sky forgets our names." He watched them take off, one after another, their engines roaring into the dawn. They flew low toward the horizon, toward the invisible fleet waiting beyond. He never saw them again. When the news came of Hiroshima, it arrived as a whisper. Men gathered around the radio, listening to the impossible. A single bomb, they said. One city gone. Then Nagasaki. The silence afterward was absolute. Akira felt no anger, no sorrow. Only confirmation. The war had finally become what it was always destined to be, a contest of ideas, not men. The Lightnings had been only the beginning, the first messengers of a new age where speed and precision replaced courage and faith. He sat on the runway as the sun set over the ruined field. The air smelled of ash and salt. In the distance, the sea glowed faintly from the fires of the last ships burning on the horizon. He realized that the world had moved on without him, that the men who would inherit the sky would speak not in prayers but in calculations. When the formal surrender was announced, he stood at attention with the others. The flag came down. No one wept. There was nothing left to weep for. Akira looked to the west, where the light faded behind the clouds. For a moment he imagined he could still hear the hum of twin engines high above, distant, eternal, indifferent. The sound of progress. And in that sound he understood the full weight of what had been lost. Not just a war but an entire way of believing. The war ended not with a roar but with a long exhale. The kind that empties a man completely, leaving nothing but breath and memory. For Lieutenant Akira Mori, there was no parade, no redemption, only a quiet that felt heavier than gunfire. The empire he had sworn to protect was gone. The world he understood, the world of honor, obedience and ritual, had collapsed in the space of a heartbeat. He was sent home to a Japan he no longer recognized. Cities were reduced to ash, railways twisted like bones. Children played among the ruins, their laughter echoing through the skeletons of buildings. The smell of burnt metal clung to everything. People bowed still, but their eyes no longer looked up when they did. Akira returned to his village near Nagano, far from the ocean, far from the sound of engines. His mother was gone. His father, frail and silent, handed him the family's old rice field. The soil had hardened, the irrigation channels dry. He worked in silence for months, trying to remember how to live without fear. Yet each morning when he looked at the horizon, he still imagined the glint of aluminum wings. At night, the memories returned, the faces of those who never came back, the glow of burning planes against the dark. Sometimes in the distance, he thought he could hear the faint thrum of engines, low and even, fading into the wind. It was impossible, yet it lingered. The Lightning had followed him home, not as an enemy but as a ghost of the future. One evening he took his old flight log from a chest beneath the floorboards. The pages were yellowed, the ink smudged, the edges warped by humidity. He turned to the last entry he had written before the surrender: "We fight with prayers, they fight with equations." He stared at it for a long time, then wrote beneath it in trembling letters, "And yet both were only men, searching for a reason to keep breathing." Years passed. Japan changed. The skies filled again, not with warplanes but with passenger aircraft, smooth, silver, bearing foreign names. The hum of engines once meant death, now it meant connection. Progress, Akira thought, had an odd sense of irony. He kept to himself, living a quiet life. But every so often he visited an airfield outside Tokyo, where the Americans had left behind some of their old aircraft. There, among the relics of destruction, stood a single restored P-38 Lightning. Its metal gleamed in the sunlight, untouched by time. Akira would stand before it for hours, hands folded behind his back, eyes tracing the familiar curves, the twin booms, the slender cockpit, the perfect symmetry. He could almost smell the salt air of the Pacific again, the scent of fuel and fear. But here, in the stillness, it was only a machine. A relic. The Predator turned monument. One day, a young American tourist approached him, camera slung around his neck. "You like that one?" he asked, smiling. "They say it was the best fighter of its time." Akira nodded. "It was more than that," he said softly. "It was the beginning." The young man laughed, not understanding. "Of what?" Akira looked at the plane, the sunlight catching on its wings. "Of everything that came after." The boy took his photo and walked away, leaving Akira alone with the ghost of the past. He reached out and touched the cool metal of the fuselage. It vibrated faintly under his palm, as if still alive, as if somewhere deep inside, the memory of flight still pulsed. He closed his eyes. For a moment he was back in the cockpit of his Zero, the horizon endless, the sun blinding, the air trembling with the sound of pursuit. He saw the Lightning again, rising from the clouds, perfect, indifferent, eternal. When he opened his eyes he felt no hatred, only understanding. The P-38 had not destroyed Japan. It had revealed it, shown the limits of faith, the fragility of pride, the truth that courage without comprehension is only suicide in slow motion. He stepped back and watched the museum staff close the hangar doors. The sound echoed like thunder fading over distant water. As the light dimmed, the silver fuselage caught the last reflection of the sunset, gold at the edges, red at the core, like fire remembered. That night, in his small home, Akira lit a candle beside his flight log. The flame flickered, weak and steady. He opened the journal one last time and wrote, "The sky taught me nothing lasts forever. Not victory, not glory, not pain. Only the will to understand. Machines will change, empires will fall, but the search to understand, that is what keeps us human." He set down the pen, closed the book and blew out the flame. The room fell into darkness. Outside, the wind moved through the trees with the same rhythm as a distant engine, steady, eternal, without judgment. And as the night deepened, Akira Mori, the pilot who had once stared into the face of the lightning, finally understood what it meant to survive. Survival was not defiance. It was memory. And memory, like the sound of those twin engines, would never truly fade.